It was supposed to be a perfect Saturday afternoon. My granddaughter, Lily, was celebrating her 10th birthday in the backyard of the home I've owned for 30 years. The sun was bright over our neighborhood in Oakhaven, and the air smelled like the vanilla cake I'd spent all morning baking for my late wife's secret recipe. As I watched the kids running around the lawn, I couldn't help but feel a bit of a sting in my chest. My wife, Martha, would have loved this. She was the one who planted the hydrangeas that were now in full bloom along the fence. I had tried my best to keep the tradition alive, hiring the face painters, setting up the bounce house, and making sure every detail was just right for Lily. But even with the laughter and the music, something felt off. My son, Julian, was standing by the patio, but he wasn't really there. He's 42 now, but he still spends most of his time staring at his phone, unable to meet my eyes for more than a second. Then there was Elena, my daughter-in-law. She was everywhere at once, pouring lemonade, fixing party hats, and laughing just a little too loudly. She always had this perfect energy that felt like a performance, like she was 1 degree too warm to be real. I've lived long enough to know that when someone tries that hard to look perfect, they're usually hiding a crack somewhere. Around 3 p.m., a delivery driver pulled up to the curb. He was carrying an elegant white box tied with a heavy silk ribbon. The card was written in beautiful, precise cursive, asterisk to Lily, with all our love, Grandma Diane and Grandpa Thomas. Star. Elena appeared at my elbow instantly, her smile fixed in place. "Oh, my parents couldn't make the trip today, but they sent this surprise," she said, her voice like honey. She shot a very specific, sharp look at Julian, but he didn't even look up from his screen. Lily tore into the box with the kind of pure excitement only a child has. Inside was a stunning antique-style porcelain doll. It wore a delicate Victorian lace dress, and its glass eyes seemed to catch every bit of the afternoon sun. "She's beautiful, Grandpa," Lily cried, lifting the doll out of the tissue paper. She tilted it back and forth, admiring the craftsmanship. But then, her little face scrunched up in confusion. "Grandpa, why do the doll's eyes look so funny? They're sparkling strangely," she asked. I leaned in closer, thinking it was just a trick of the light reflecting off the glass. But as I got within inches of the doll's face, my blood turned to ice. Embedded deep inside the right pupil, barely visible to the naked eye, was a tiny, pin-sized black lens. It was a camera. Suddenly, the sounds of the party faded into a dull roar in my ears. The children laughing, the parents chatting. It all felt miles away. This wasn't a birthday present. It was a piece of high-tech surveillance equipment. Someone had sent a gift into my home to watch me, and they had used my granddaughter to do it. Decades of working as a private investigator had taught me one thing: never show your hand until you're ready to play. I kept my face completely neutral. I didn't shout, and I didn't let my hands shake. "Let Grandpa take a closer look, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "I want to make sure there aren't any loose parts. You go play with your friends for a bit." Lily skipped off, leaving me standing there holding the doll like it was a piece of evidence at a crime scene. I could feel Elena's eyes on me. She was still smiling, but her eyes were like shards of ice. "Everything okay, Arthur?" she asked, her tone light and airy. "Just fine," I lied, heading toward the back door. "Just checking the old-fashioned hinges." I walked through the kitchen, past the photos of Martha, and straight into my private study. I locked the door behind me. I didn't panic, and I didn't call the police yet. I did what I was trained to do. I began to gather evidence. Once the party wound down around 6 p.m., the other parents gathered their tired, sugar-crashed kids and headed home. Elena and Julian gave me those same polite, hollow goodbyes they always did, making empty promises to visit more often next month. Lily hugged me tight before I tucked her into the guest room, where she stayed every weekend. She fell asleep almost instantly, still glowing from the cake and the excitement of being 10. I, however, couldn't sleep. I went back to my study and locked the door, the porcelain doll sitting on my desk under the harsh glow of the lamp. I pulled out the heavy magnifying glass I'd used for years during my time as a private investigator and started my examination. In the right eye, I saw it clearly. A professional-grade wireless camera lens, tiny enough to be missed by anyone not looking for it. When I unscrewed the base of the doll, I found a GPS tracker nestled inside the stuffing, active and transmitting my location in real time. I took high-resolution photos of everything. Evidence is only useful if you can prove it exists, and I wasn't about to let this disappear. As I sat there, the weight of the situation finally started to settle on me. For the last few weeks, I'd had that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, that feeling of being watched in my own home. I tried to blame it on my age or the lingering grief of losing Martha, but I'd been dead wrong. The memory of where this all started hit me like a physical blow. It was exactly 3 weeks ago. I'd come home early from the hardware store and heard voices coming from Lily's room upstairs. I've lived in this house a long time. I know exactly which floorboards to avoid if I want to move quietly. I stood in the hallway, just out of sight, and heard Elena talking to Lily. "When people ask about your grandpa," Elena had said in a voice that was way too sweet, "you can just tell them he forgets things sometimes. That he's getting a little confused. But he doesn't forget." Lily's voice had been small and confused. "He's just getting older, sweetheart," Elena replied. "He might need special help soon. It's nothing for you to worry about." At the time, I should have stormed in there and demanded to know what she was doing. But my old training kicked in. When you suspect a crime, you document it first. I'd pulled out my phone and started recording right there in the hallway. Over the next few weeks, I'd captured hours of Elena on the phone when she thought I was napping. I'd heard her talking about papers being ready and how once he's placed, we can start the process, because I was too old to understand. I looked at the doll's painted, sinister smile and finally understood the why. This wasn't about my health. It was about the math. My house in Oakhaven is now worth about $310,000. Between my retirement savings and my old investment accounts, there's another $140,000. That's $450,000. A nice, round number worth destroying a man's life for. Martha's voice echoed in my head. "Trust your gut, Arthur. It's smarter than most people's brains." My gut was telling me that I probably only had a week, maybe less, before they tried to make their move and lock me away in some cheap nursing home. I couldn't go to my son. Julian had already made his choice by standing silently on that patio while his wife dismantled my life. I needed a professional. Not a friend who would just feel sorry for me, but someone who knew how to fight this specific kind of evil. I needed a lawyer who specialized in protecting people from their own families. At 2 a.m., I sat at my computer and searched for the best elder law attorney in the state. One name kept coming up: Victoria Sterling. I called her emergency line as the sun began to peek over the horizon. It was Sunday morning, but I didn't care. I was done being the confused old man they wanted me to be. Sunday morning is usually the quietest time of the week, but as I sat in Victoria Sterling's downtown office, the air felt heavy with a different kind of silence. Victoria was exactly what I'd hoped for. Sharp, observant, and not easily rattled. She spent the first hour reading through my notes and evidence with the focused intensity of a professor grading a final dissertation. The porcelain doll sat on her heavy mahogany desk between us, its glass eyes catching the morning light, serving as a silent, creepy witness to our meeting. "How long have you been suspecting this, Arthur?" she asked, her eyes never leaving the files. I told her the truth. I'd known for certain for 3 weeks, but deep down, I'd probably sensed it for much longer. She then played the recordings I'd captured. Elena's voice filled the room, cold and calculating as she coached Lily to tell people that I was forgetting things. Victoria didn't look surprised. She'd clearly seen this kind of betrayal before. After the recordings finished, Victoria turned to her computer. "Mr. Crawford, Has anyone in your family made subtle suggestions about your memory lately? Questions about your medicine or appointments? I nodded, explaining how Elena had been planting those seeds for a while, even getting Lily to ask if I needed help with basic tasks. Victoria's fingers flew across her keyboard. What you're describing is a textbook case of financial exploitation through guardianship fraud, she explained. She pulled up the court filings for our county, and my stomach dropped through the floor. A guardianship petition had already been filed against me 10 days ago. This was before the birthday party and before the doll even arrived. She turned her monitor toward me, and I saw my own name at the top of official-looking legal documents. There were even nursing home admission papers already drafted. But the most sickening part was seeing my own signature at the bottom of 3 different forms. Signatures I knew I had never signed. They were forgeries. The attorney of record for this petition is a man named Richard Thornton, Victoria said, clicking onto another page. I didn't recognize the name at first, but Victoria showed me his history. He had handled 3 nearly identical cases this year alone, all involving sudden guardianship claims against elderly people with significant assets, and all ending with their estates being liquidated within 60 days of them being placed in a home. Then, a memory clicked into place. I'd seen Elena's phone charging on the kitchen counter a few times, and messages from an RT would pop up. I'd seen photos, too, Elena and a man at expensive restaurants with wine and candlelight. I'd assumed they were just business dinners with clients from her pharmaceutical sales job. But now I knew better. I believe your daughter-in-law is having an affair with this attorney, Victoria said, her voice flat and professional. They are conspiring to have you declared incompetent, so they can take full control of your $450,000 in assets. Your home, your savings, everything. She warned me that once a person is locked in a memory care unit under these circumstances, they rarely live long, as the guardians have every financial incentive to cut costs on care. It was, in her words, a polite, legal, slow murder. The room felt like it was closing in, but Victoria reached across the desk. We're going to fight this, Arthur. But you need to be extremely careful. She explained that while we would file a police report and request an emergency hearing, the next 2 weeks would be the most dangerous. Now that the papers were filed, Elena and Thornton would likely try to create an incident, something to make me look unstable, forgetful, or even dangerous to myself or others. They needed real-world evidence for the judge. Whatever you do, Victoria warned, do not be alone with Elena or anyone connected to her. They are looking for a reason to escalate this. I nodded, my mind already racing. I knew she was right, but I didn't realize just how quickly that escalation would come. Monday morning, the first thing I did was visit the local precinct. I handed over the porcelain doll, and the officer cataloged it as evidence with a level of flat professionalism that was almost comforting. I gave them the GPS tracker and explained the recordings I'd captured of Elena coaching my granddaughter. A case number was issued, and I was told someone from the fraud department would follow up. It felt like I was finally moving from defense to offense. By Monday afternoon, the first incident Victoria warned me about arrived. I was in the kitchen making lunch when Elena called. Her voice was bright, almost musical, as if she hadn't spent the last month trying to ruin my life. Arthur, Lily's been asking for another birthday celebration. Just a girl's day for her birthday week, she said. She told me she would pick Lily up at 2 p.m., and I could come get her at 5 p.m. at an address she'd text me later. Every instinct I had as a former private investigator screamed, trap, but I knew that if I refused, I would look like the paranoid or uncooperative old man they wanted the court to see. Perfect, I said, my voice betraying nothing. I'll see you at 2. At 1:30 p.m., Julian's truck pulled into my driveway. He climbed out of the cab like a man walking toward his own execution, head down, shoulders slumped. He didn't come in for coffee. He just stood in the doorway, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, he said, Dad, Just be careful today. I looked him in the eye, searching for the boy I'd raised. What should I be careful of, Julian? He opened his mouth, but then closed it and just shook his head. He didn't have the spine to tell me the truth, but he knew enough to feel the weight of what was coming. Before Elena arrived, I had one more gift for Lily. I'd bought a small, pink GPS watch the day before, marketed as a kid's safety device. I showed her the SOS button and tested it to make sure it worked. Lily, Grandpa has a new watch for you, I told her, making it sound like a fun toy. I sent a quick text to the phone she keeps in her backpack. Press the red button if you need me for any reason. I'll always come. Elena picked her up at 2 p.m. sharp, giving me a smile that was all teeth. I watched them drive away, Lily waving from the back window. I waited, the clock on the wall ticking like a heartbeat. At 3:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was the address, 4929 Industrial Park Way. I pulled it up on satellite view immediately. My hands went cold. The map showed a row of low, gray buildings at the very edge of town in a deserted industrial zone. I clicked the specific address, and it came up, vacant for lease. There was no arcade, no birthday restaurant, no reason for a 10-year-old child to be there on a Monday afternoon. I realized the game they were playing. They wanted me to show up at 5 p.m. at a deserted, locked building. If I were found wandering around a vacant industrial lot, looking for a party that didn't exist, it would be the perfect evidence of my confusion and dementia for the police or the court. I wasn't going to wait until 5 p.m. I grabbed my keys and left at 4:30. When I arrived, the parking lot was a graveyard of broken asphalt and weeds. Building 4929 was a hollow shell with boarded-up windows and a faded, for lease banner flapping in the wind. There were no cars, no decorations, and, most importantly, no Lily. I walked the perimeter, every door locked and every window dark. The building hadn't seen life in months. I called Elena straight to voicemail. I texted her that I was at the address, but there was no response. I called Lily's phone, but it just rang and rang. Panic started to rise in my throat, but I forced it down. Panic makes you stupid, and I needed to be smart. Then my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call or a text. It was an emergency alert from the GPS watch. The SOS had been activated. The ping on my phone hit me like a jolt of electricity. The SOS wasn't coming from the empty industrial lot. It was coming from 847 Oakmont Drive. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized that address belonged to Elena's parents, Carol and Robert Martinez. They were on the other side of town, at least 25 minutes away. I had been sent to a ghost town while my granddaughter was being held miles in the opposite direction. My hands shook as I dialed 911. I told the dispatcher that my 10-year-old granddaughter had just activated an emergency alert and that I had been intentionally sent to a false location. I made sure to mention the active guardianship case and gave them Victoria Sterling's name and number. The dispatcher's tone immediately shifted to something more serious. "Officers are being dispatched, sir," she said. "Do not enter the residence until they arrive." I didn't care about the speed limit. I drove faster than I had in 20 years, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the steering wheel. Every red light felt like an hour of my life slipping away. When I finally skidded to a halt in front of the Martinez house, a patrol car was already pulling up. Officer Matthew Cooper stepped out, his hand resting near his belt as he approached me. The Martinez house looked perfectly normal, neat lawn, blooming flower beds, and a flag by the door. It was the kind of place that hid its rot under a fresh coat of paint. I rang the bell, and Carol Martinez answered with a smile that was as sweet as arsenic. "Arthur? And an officer?" she said, acting surprised. What a lovely surprise. Officer Cooper didn't play along. He told her we received an emergency alert from a minor at this address. Carol gave a dismissive little laugh. "Oh, that's just a misunderstanding," she lied. "Lily was just playing with a new toy." But then Lily appeared in the hallway behind her. The moment she saw me, her face crumpled. She pushed past her grandmother and ran straight into my arms, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. "Grandpa, you came. You came," she cried. She told me through her tears that Carol had told her I forgot about her and that I wasn't coming to get her. Elena emerged from a back room then, her perfect smile frozen in place like a mask. She tried to claim that the whole thing was a mix-up and that I had simply gotten the party address confused. Officer Cooper looked at her, then down at the text message on my phone. "Ma'am, he showed me the text you sent," he said flatly. "This wasn't the address." Robert Martinez stepped forward, getting defensive and shouting that Elena could take her child wherever she wanted. But the officer ignored him. Officer Cooper took Lily aside to speak with her alone. I watched them from the porch, my blood boiling as I saw Lily wipe her eyes and speak quietly to him. When he walked back over, his jaw was set tight. He told me that Lily felt scared because they kept cornering her and asking her if I forgot to feed her or if I seemed confused. That was why she had pressed the SOS button. No arrests were made that night, but the paper trail was growing. I took Lily home, and she fell asleep in the car, completely exhausted from the fear and the tears. After I tucked her into bed, I went straight to my study. I needed to see exactly what that watch had captured. I synced the GPS watch to my computer, expecting to see just a list of locations. But as the data loaded, I found a folder I hadn't expected: audio backup. The device had been capturing ambient sound automatically and storing it in the cloud. I put on my headphones, my heart racing, and pressed play on the file timestamped during the time they were at the Martinez house. I was about to hear exactly what went on behind those closed doors. The silence of my study was absolute, broken only by the hum of my computer as I stared at the audio files recovered from Lily's watch. I put on my headphones and clicked the file timestamped at 3:47 p.m., the height of my confusion at the industrial park. The first few minutes were just the sound of movement and fabric rustling. But then Elena's voice cut through the static, crystal clear and chillingly cold. "Okay, Lily, let's practice again," she said. "This is very important." I heard my granddaughter's voice, so small and fragile, saying she didn't want to practice anymore. Then Carol Martinez joined in. Her voice was like sugar-coated poison as she told Lily that I needed real help, and that Lily was the only one who could make people listen. Elena's instructions were specific. She told Lily that when the social worker asked, she had to say, "I forget things." Say, "Grandpa forgets to make me meals. Sometimes I have to remind him." I heard Lily start to sob, protesting that it wasn't true and that I always made her breakfast. But Carol didn't stop. She asked Lily if she loved me, then told her that if she didn't lie, something bad could happen to me, that I might fall or get very sick because I forgot my medicine. The recording was agonizing to hear. Elena eventually snapped, her voice turning sharp as she called Lily difficult, and demanded she say the words. Finally, Lily's voice broke. "My grandpa can't take care of himself anymore," she whispered through her tears. I had to stop the recording. My hands were shaking with a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was the psychological torture of a child. I forced myself to listen to the end. I heard Robert Martinez ask if they should worry about the watch, but Elena laughed it off. "It's just a kid's GPS thing," she said. "Arthur is too old to figure out the audio function anyway." Her arrogance was her biggest mistake. The study door creaked open, and I looked up to see Julian standing there. He looked like a ghost, pale, hollow-eyed, and trembling. "Dad, I can't sleep," he whispered. Without a word, I handed him the headphones and restarted the recording. I watched his face as the color drained from it. I watched the horror dawn in his eyes as he heard his own wife and mother-in-law threatening his daughter. He tore the headphones off and collapsed into the chair across from me. "I knew she wanted you in a home, Dad," he choked out. "I knew about Thornton, but I didn't know they were using Lily like this." Then the full truth came pouring out. Julian had found texts between Elena and Richard Thornton 6 months ago. He knew about the affair and their messages discussing my estate as a financial opportunity. When he had confronted Elena, she threatened him, saying that if he told anyone or tried to leave, she would take Lily away and he would never see her again. He had stayed quiet out of a cowardly hope that Lily wouldn't get hurt. "I have everything, Dad," he said, his voice finally hardening. "I kept all the texts, the emails, and the hotel receipts as insurance, but I was too afraid to use them." He looked at me with red, tear-filled eyes and stood up, his shoulders square for the first time in years. "I'll testify against her, against Thornton, all of them. Lily deserves better than this, and so do you." My son had finally found his spine, but we only had 9 days until the emergency hearing. 9 days to build a case before Elena and her conspirators realized we had enough evidence to destroy them. I picked up the phone and called Victoria Sterling. It was time to go to war. By Wednesday morning, Victoria Sterling's conference room had been transformed into what she called a war room, and that was exactly how it felt. It had been 2 days since the terrifying incident with the GPS watch, and only 7 days remained until the emergency hearing. The long table was buried under a mountain of documents, photographs, and digital recordings. Victoria stood at the head of the table like a general preparing for a final stand, while Julian sat beside me, his eyes red from lack of sleep and his coffee sitting untouched and cold. Victoria began to inventory our weapons. First was the porcelain doll, which was now in police custody. Forensics had already confirmed that the hidden camera was transmitting live video to an IP address registered directly to Richard Thornton's law office. Next was the GPS tracker found in the doll's base, which linked back to that same address. Then there were my own recordings of Elena coaching Lily from 3 weeks ago, followed by the devastating audio from Lily's watch where Elena and Carol Martinez used threats to force a 10-year-old to lie. Then Julian slid a thick folder across the table. It was the collection he had been hiding out of fear. 6 months of text messages between Elena and Thornton. They didn't just discuss their affair. They talked about me like I was a piece of equipment to be sold. They discussed exactly when the old man would be placed in a home and laid out a specific timeline for liquidating my assets. Seeing my life, my home, my hard-earned savings, reduced to simple dollar signs on a printout made my stomach turn. Julian had even kept the receipts from 15 different hotel stays they had shared, all paid for on their joint credit card. "This is their playbook," Victoria said, her jaw tightening. "Institutionalize, isolate, and liquidate." Elena didn't just come up with this. She learned it from her parents. Victoria's strategy was clear. We would present the surveillance as proof of premeditated fraud and play the recordings to show the court the psychological weaponization of a child. Julian would testify about the conspiracy, David would testify to my competency, and a financial expert would show that I had managed my $450,000 perfectly. "We have them," Victoria told us, looking each of us in the eye. "But remember, desperate people do desperate things. For the next 7 days, stay in public. Do not go anywhere alone. Document every single interaction." She knew that since their legal trap was failing, they might try something much more dangerous to stop us from reaching that courtroom. Friday morning finally arrived, and the air inside the Mecklenburg County Courthouse felt cold and sterile. I walked down those long, echoing hallways with my son, Julian, on one side and my attorney, Victoria Sterling, leading the way. This was the hearing that would decide my freedom, my home, and my future with Lily. It was scheduled to last 3 hours, but in my mind, the truth was so clear it should have been over in 3 minutes. The courtroom was a sea of polished wood and heavy silence. Behind the high bench sat Judge Karen Anderson, a woman with steel-gray hair and a reputation for having seen every trick in the book during her 30 years on the bench. I watched Elena and her lawyer, Richard Thornton, sit at the petitioner's table. Thornton looked exactly like the corporate shark Victoria had described. Expensive suit, perfectly groomed hair, and a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. In the gallery, Carol and Robert Martinez sat with smug expressions, looking as though they had already won. Victoria had ensured Lily was in a separate room with a court-appointed advocate. The judge had ordered that she shouldn't have to witness the ugliness of this battle. Thornton stood up first, his voice dripping with a fake, oily compassion. "Your Honor," he began. "This is a tragic case of a family trying to protect a man they love from his own rapid cognitive decline. He painted a picture of me as a confused 70-year-old who couldn't be trusted to live alone, let alone care for a child. He claimed I had memory lapses and was becoming a danger to myself." Then Elena took the stand. She was the image of a grieving, perfect daughter-in-law, even managing to squeeze out a few crocodile tears. "He forgets to feed Lily?" she lied, her voice trembling. "Last month, he even left the stove on and forgot about it. He gets so confused about simple appointments." Carol Martinez followed her, testifying that I had started suffering from paranoid delusions, specifically accusing them of spying on me. They even brought in a few friends of the Martinez family who claimed I didn't seem as sharp as I used to be. Thornton finished his presentation by showing the judge a list of excellent memory care facilities where I could receive the supervision I supposedly needed. Then it was Victoria's turn. She didn't start with a long speech. She simply walked to the evidence table and picked up the porcelain doll. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A," she said. Even from across the room, the doll's glass eyes seemed to stare back at the judge. Victoria called a technical expert to the stand, a young woman who explained in cold and clinical terms that the doll contained a high-tech camera. This device was active, the expert testified, transmitting a live video feed to an IP address registered to the law offices of Richard Thornton. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Anderson's pen stopped moving, and she looked over her glasses at Thornton with an expression that could have frozen fire. Victoria then presented the GPS tracker found in the doll's base, which also linked back to Thornton's office. "This isn't family concern, Your Honor," Victoria said, her voice ringing through the room. "This is a coordinated surveillance operation against a man in his own home." But the true killing blow was yet to come. Victoria signaled the bailiff, who pressed play on the courtroom's audio system. Suddenly, Lily's small, terrified voice filled the room. We all sat in absolute silence as the recording played, the sound of Elena and Carol Martinez browbeating a 10-year-old girl into lying about her grandfather. We heard the threats that I would get sick if she didn't cooperate. We heard Lily sobbing, brokenly repeating the lies they had forced into her mouth. "My grandpa can't take care of himself anymore." The recording lasted only 4 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When it finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Someone in the gallery gasped, "Oh my God!" Judge Anderson's face had turned to stone. Elena was gripping the armrests of her chair so hard her knuckles were white, and Thornton's hands were visibly shaking. The judge looked at Victoria. "Miss Sterling," she said, her voice dangerously level, "call your next witness." Victoria looked at my son. "The petitioner's husband, Julian Crawford, Your Honor." The tension in the courtroom was so thick it felt hard to breathe as Julian walked to the witness stand. He looked like a man who was finally letting go of a heavy burden he'd carried for far too long. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, and for the first time in years, he looked directly at me with eyes that were clear and steady. "Mr. Crawford," Victoria Sterling began, her voice calm but commanding, "tell the court what you know about the petition filed against your father." Julian took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I've known about my wife's affair with Mr. Thornton for 6 months." A collective gasp went through the gallery, but Julian didn't stop. He pulled out the folder of evidence he had been hiding. "I have thousands of text messages between them. They weren't just discussing a relationship. They were discussing my father's estate as a financial opportunity." They had a specific timeline for when he would be placed in a home and how quickly they could liquidate his assets. Victoria began reading the messages aloud, and hearing them in that formal setting made them sound even more monstrous. Asterisk, once the old man is placed, how quickly can we move? Asterisk, one message read. Asterisk, guardianship gives us full control. Liquidate within 60 days. Finally free. We can start our life together, star. Thornton tried to object, calling it hearsay, but Judge Anderson snapped at him to sit down. Julian's voice cracked as he finished his testimony. I was a coward, Your Honor. I was afraid of losing my daughter, so I stayed quiet. But after hearing what they did to Lily, how they threatened her and used her as a weapon against her own grandfather, I realized I was protecting the wrong person. I'm here to make it right. Next, David Sullivan took the stand. He spoke with the warmth of a 40-year friendship, telling the judge about our weekly chess matches and how my mind remained as sharp as the day we met. A man with dementia doesn't beat me 2 out of 3 times at chess, he said firmly. A financial expert followed him, testifying that I had managed my $450,000 in assets perfectly, with no signs of confusion or mismanagement. Finally, Victoria called Elena to the stand. The perfect daughter-in-law mask was completely gone now, replaced by a look of sheer terror. Victoria asked her directly if she knew the doll contained a camera. Elena tried to blame her parents, but Victoria was ready. Your phone accessed that camera feed 47 times in just 3 days, Mrs. Crawford, she stated. Elena crumbled. She tried to claim she was just concerned, but the silence that followed her excuse was absolute. Judge Anderson removed her reading glasses and looked at the participants with a level of disgust I had never seen on a judge's face. I have heard enough, she said, her gavel cracking like a gunshot. The petition for guardianship is denied, she announced. Mr. Crawford has demonstrated complete and total competency, but she didn't stop there. She announced that she was referring the case to the district attorney for criminal investigation into elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, child manipulation, and illegal surveillance. She also ordered the state bar to investigate Richard Thornton for criminal conspiracy and ethical violations. Then, she turned her attention to Lily's safety. She issued an immediate restraining order against Elena and the Martinez parents, forbidding them from having any contact with Lily or me. Emergency custody of Lily is granted to Arthur Crawford, she ruled. She looked at Elena one last time. Elder abuse is a crime. Using a child to perpetrate it is unconscionable. This court will not tolerate it. As we walked out of that courtroom, the weight that had been crushing my chest for weeks finally lifted. We had won. But as Victoria reminded me, the end of the court case was just the beginning of our healing. 3 months have passed since that long afternoon in the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, and the dust has finally begun to settle. My life, once nearly stolen by shadows and secrets, belongs to me again. The legal fallout was swift and devastating for those who tried to dismantle my world. Richard Thornton, the man who used his law degree as a weapon for greed, has been officially disbarred and is currently facing a mountain of criminal charges. His ethical career is over, and the state bar is still uncovering the trail of other families he helped exploit. Elena lost all custody of Lily. The court granted her only 2 hours of supervised visitation a month, and so far, she has only shown up once. It seems her perfect mother persona was only useful when there was a house and a bank account attached to it. As for Carol and Robert Martinez, they are under a permanent restraining order and a very active criminal investigation. The authorities are looking deep into their past, including the suspicious depletion of Robert's mother's estate years ago. Justice may have been slow for their previous victims, but it is finally knocking on their door. My son, Julian, has finally found his footing. He filed for divorce the day after the hearing and has moved into a small place nearby. He's in therapy, working through the guilt of his own silence and rebuilding the trust he almost lost with his daughter and me. We have a long road ahead, but for the first time in years, he can look me in the eye. But the real victory is Lily. She is in therapy, healing from the psychological games her mother and grandparents played with her head. She's thriving in school again, no longer weighed down by the practice sessions and the terrifying lies she was forced to memorize. She knows she is safe now. Earlier today, I stood in Martha's rose garden with Lily, just like we used to. The sun was warm, and the hydrangeas were still holding on to their color. Lily looked up at me, her expression more serious than a child's should be. "Grandpa," she whispered, "some kids at school said you went too far against Mommy. Did you?" I knelt down so I was at her level, taking her small hands in mine. "No, sweetheart," I told her firmly. "I went exactly far enough. Sometimes people try to take things that don't belong to them, your home, your freedom, your family. When that happens, you don't go quietly. You stand up and you fight. And if you're lucky and you have people who love you, you win. Just like you and me." Looking back at these past few months, I realize how close I came to losing everything. Not just the $450,000 or the house, but the heart of my family. I nearly let my pride and the belief that family handles things internally cost me my granddaughter's future. I almost ignored the warning signs. The strange sparkle in a doll's eye, the coached silences, and that prickling feeling of being watched. If there is one thing I've learned from this, it's that silence is the most effective weapon a predator has. When you see manipulation, you must document it immediately. When you hear lies being planted in a child's mind, you record every word. You don't wait for the perfect moment to act on your gut. Sometimes, loving your family means standing against them in a courtroom to protect the innocent. These stories aren't always about wisdom and cookies. Sometimes they are about survival. I stopped treating this like a family disagreement and started treating it like the crime it truly was. It wasn't an easy road, but I had the strength to walk it. Lily and I are a team now. Truth has a way of coming out, and when it does, justice isn't going too far. It's simply going far enough to make things right.